Today we have a special from the Grotto Archives, how to paint a Warhammer Squig. Now you can paint a squig any colour. I've seen some great ones in blue and yellow and even pink, but we're going for the classic red here with a base coat of Khorne red. And the GW Reds are so nice to work with, they make painting minis like this a breeze. Definitely some of their best colours, which is very convenient for a squig. Now we'll talk about where this mini is originally from a bit later, but he's certainly the squig daddy. And like all base coats, I keep the paint thin and do 2 coats to get a nice solid layer. You might have some other bits on your squig that warrant a different colour. I'm using green here for the tail and tongue, but colours like blue and purple can also be great with red. I'm just going for a classic 90s look with this particular miniature, which was all about a slightly more garish colour palette, something I find just personally awesome. One thing that all squig models have in common are big toothy maws, and they actually become the main focal point of the model because really they're just balls with teeth. So I'm giving the gums a base coat of Screamer Pink, and the teeth as well as any other bits of bone on the model are going to get a base coat of XV88. Now you can generally be more sparing with teeth and gums on minis, but because these are a focal point like I mentioned, we're going to do a few layers of highlights, and these nice strong base coats are going to help with this. Now again, not all squigs are going to have metal parts or armour, but I'm just giving these areas a coat of Iron Warriors, which is one of my favourite silvers because it's got quite a dark tone to it, which is helpful for not stealing the eye away from more important areas. I think this can happen sometimes with bright silver, so you've got to be a little bit careful with it. Classic Nuln for the shading, there's no better time saver honestly, and the black lining effect this is going to achieve is only going to help this 90s miniature look the part, I reckon. A brown wash would also work here, particularly because there's a lot of red on the model, and brown as a wash works really well with red, so it's going to be up to you and the tone that you're after. Now if you're wondering where this miniature comes from, it's the original Gobbler to go with the famed Goblin Warlord Skarsnik, back from the old Warhammer Fantasy. I'm not sure on the exact date, but this was sculpted sometime in the early 90s I believe. The model was in a bit of disarray before its bath in the paint stripper, but it's always nice to preserve the memory of what it once was in some kind of form, right? Back to the miniature though, the wash is all dry and it's time to paint the eyes. I think yellow looks good for this, and Avalon Sunset is perfect here because it's got excellent coverage. You can actually highlight the eye with some Euro Yellow or white, but I'm going to add some pupils because it makes the mini look more hilarious. And I think that's important for squigs, particularly this squig. I'm also coming back around with all the base colours to freshen them up a bit after the wash. This is also a good way to build the first layer of shading because if you're a bit more sparing with the application here, you can get more of a transition between the base tone and the shading in the deep crevices. If you're enjoying this video, 2 great ways to support the Hobby Grotto and help me make even more content is to become a channel member or leave a super thanks in a comment, and both these options you can find just below the video. Of course, all support is always greatly appreciated. Time to highlight Gobbler's skin, and like I mentioned before, the GW Reds are just so easy to work with. They've got excellent coverage, and I think they're probably some of the best colours in their range, so I'm just working up through them here. The classic Mephiston Red is the next level after Khorne Red, and then we're moving into Evil Sunz Scarlet. And when it comes to the Evil Sunz Scarlet, this is quite a bright colour, so it's good to keep this thin and be sparing at first. Too much of this can change the overall colour vibe of the Mini, which is no good if you want a darker looking squig with that nice, corn red showing through. In the end, the level you take this highlighting is up to you. You can make it quite pale or more saturated with oranges and yellow, just depending on the overall look you're going for. Mood Green is a good colour for any highlights of areas of Warpstone Glow. If these were larger areas, I would blend this more, but none of these are really focal points, so it's just a quick highlight. You can also mix yellow with green. I think that's a good way to, build up some highlights if you don't have, a brighter color like Moot Green, or you just want to do a little bit of blending. I think it's always good to do a little bit of blending. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the teeth and gums are a focal point on squigs, so we're going to spend a bit of time adding some highlights here, mixing up Screamer Pink with some white. Now, I just added some white to pink as I mentioned to mix up my colors because I like to kind of mix things up, but you could also use something like Emperor's Children to kind of mix up your highlights with that, something that's already an established pink. But for small areas like this, I don't mind just adding little bits of white to kind of blend it up like that. And I'm also blending up the XV88 with a Shabti Bone. These are quite large teeth, so they can take a few layers of highlights here. The main work is being done with the pure Ushabti Bone to keep them nice and bright. You could just go with pure white for the highlights, honestly, and I generally would if they were smaller teeth, but I just like to mix in a dash of bone so that it keeps that very slight tone to it and doesn't look too stark. Some quick highlights here on the silver. You don't really need to worry about highlighting true metallic metal too much, but a single highlight with a lighter silver can really help add some shine. If you're painting a character model or a particularly important squig, you might want to push the highlights further with some orange or pale red. I'm going with orange as a more stylistic choice. The orange highlights also help take it back to that 90s Warhammer zone by adding even more warmth to the red overall. Now you could obviously use an orange for this. I'm just again mixing a little bit of yellow with it because I like mixing colours. I think it's a good skill to always be practicing. So there you have it, a classic 90s model with a colour scheme you can still use on any squig today. I don't know, I think squigs are pretty timeless. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Hobby Grotto.